In 2022, this company was worth $22 billion. Today, its founder's stake is valued at essentially nothing. By the end of this, you will know the 4 decisions that did it. This is how it collapsed. 1 company, 1 fatal decision, 1 autopsy. Not a fraud. That is the first thing to set aside, because it is where most of the coverage went and it is the least useful place to look. There was no fake machine in a back room, no invented technology, no single villain you can point at and file the whole thing under. What happened to Byju's is more ordinary than fraud and considerably more common. A company read 1 number correctly and then drew exactly the wrong conclusion from it and kept drawing that conclusion for 2 years while spending against it. 3 questions to hold on to. Who decided? What did they miss? And who paid for it, because it was not the people who decided? Byju Raveendran was a teacher first. That matters because it explains the thing that actually worked. He taught mathematics to enormous rooms of students preparing for India's engineering and medical entrance examinations, the ones that decide a young person's next decade in a single morning. He filled stadiums doing it. He was, by every account including his competitors, extremely good at it. The app came later, the teaching came first, and the teaching was never the problem. By 2019, Byju's was the most valuable startup in India. By 2022, it was the most valuable education technology company anywhere in the world, carrying a valuation of roughly $22 billion and a stated ambition of teaching 100 million children. The money behind it was not naive money. General Atlantic, Sequoia's India arm, SoftBank, Prosus, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. These are institutions with research teams, diligence budgets, and decades of pattern recognition. Every one of them looked at the same set of numbers. Every one of them was wrong in the same direction about what those numbers actually meant. Decision 1. In 2020, the schools closed. Roughly 250 million Indian students went home and stayed there for months with no clear date to return. Every one of them needed something to learn from that was not a classroom and not a teacher standing in front of them. Byju's enrollment went vertical. So did enrollment at every one of its competitors and at companies that barely had a product. That was not one company outperforming the market. That was an entire country locked indoors with nowhere else to send its children. The decision was not to grow. Any company would grow into that. The decision was to treat a closed school spike as the new permanent floor and to spend against it. Every commitment you are about to hear was sized for a world in which the schools never fully reopened. India's schools began reopening through 2021. The spending did not resize. That is decision 1, and everything after it is arithmetic. Decision 2. Spend the spike on other companies. Between 2021 and 2022, Byju's did not build into that demand. It bought into it across the entire sector in almost every direction at once. More than $2.5 billion of acquisitions in roughly 2 years, funded by capital raised against the spike. Aakash, a physical coaching chain, for a reported figure near $1 billion. Great Learning, White Hat Junior Epic, an American children's reading platform, for around $500 million. Look at that list again, slowly. A physical classroom chain with real estate and teachers on payroll. A children's coding school. An American reading app for young children. A professional skills platform. 4 entirely different businesses, 4 different customers, 4 different ways of making money, 4 cultures. Buying a company takes an afternoon and a wire transfer. Integrating one takes about 3 years of unglamorous work by people who are not in the room when the deal is signed. Byju's bought faster than any organization on earth could absorb, and the absorbing simply never happened. Aakash is the detail that matters most, and we will come back to it before the end. It was the steadiest, most profitable thing anywhere in the group. It was also, in time, the collateral. Decision 3. Fund the spree with borrowed money on hard terms. In late 2021, Byju's raised $1.2 billion, not as equity, but as a leveraged loan. A term loan B. That is the instrument American private equity uses to finance buyouts, and it arrived on an Indian education company's balance sheet at a scale the sector had never seen. Understand the difference, because it is the whole story. Equity forgives you. A missed quarter, a bad year, a strategy that needs another 18 months to prove itself. Equity grumbles and waits, because equity only wins if you eventually win. Debt does not wait. Debt has covenants and dates and remedies. The loan required audited accounts. Byju's did not deliver them on time. The FY21 results arrived a year and a half late, and when they arrived, the losses had been restated dramatically upward. From that moment forward, the company was no longer negotiating with its lenders about a business plan. It was negotiating about a default from the weaker side of the table, with every month making the position worse. The lenders eventually moved on Aakash, the physical coaching chain, the one asset in the group that reliably made money. That is what pledging your healthiest business means. Decision 4, and the one that turned a hard year into an ending. Let the governance go. In June 2023, Deloitte resigned as auditor, citing delays in receiving the financial statements it needed to complete the audit. On the same day, 3 board members resigned as well. The directors representing Prosus, Peak 15, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative all walked at once, which is not a coincidence and was not presented as one. Understand what that means. Your auditor and your most sophisticated investors' own directors left on the same day. That is not a disagreement about strategy. That is people declining to be in the room. After that, there was no auditor and no independent voice on the board, at precisely the moment when the company most needed both. The reporting problems that triggered the exits in the first place did not get fixed, because the people who would have insisted on fixing them had left. What followed was not a collapse so much as a long unwinding in public, in courtrooms. The investors began writing the value down and then kept writing it down. Prosus and BlackRock marked their holdings first to a fraction of what they had paid, then lower, and eventually to something indistinguishable from zero. There is a separate dispute, still contested in litigation, over the location of roughly $533 million raised by that loan. Lenders allege it was moved beyond their reach. The company has disputed their account. I am not going to tell you how that ends, because it has not ended. And the thing that finally opened the insolvency door was almost small: unpaid sponsorship dues owed to India's cricket board. A company that had raised billions was taken into insolvency proceedings over a sports sponsorship bill. That is what the end of runway actually looks like. Not a dramatic failure. An unpaid invoice. So who paid? Employees paid, in waves of layoffs running across 3 years, thousands of them at a time. A great many of those people had joined through the acquisitions, which is to say they were bought and then let go by the same decision. Families paid, having been sold long and expensive multi-year course packages, often on credit, by a sales operation that regulators and investigative reporters criticized heavily for how hard it pushed and who it pushed hardest on. Investors paid, marking $22 billion of paper value down to approximately nothing. And the founder paid, because his entire fortune was that same paper, and a teacher who was briefly a billionaire on the strength of it ended with a stake valued at effectively zero. Those are the 4 decisions. A temporary spike treated as permanent. A spree bought faster than it could be absorbed. Debt raised against accounts that were not ready. And a governance structure allowed to empty out exactly when it was needed. Not one of those 4 is exotic. Not one of them required anybody to lie. Every single one is available to any company currently having the best year it has ever had, which is exactly when they are hardest to see. That is what makes this worth your attention rather than a headline about a fallen unicorn. The teaching was real. The demand was real. The company was real. What was not real was the assumption that the best year would be every year. Quick note, this is for education only and is not investment advice. Always do your own research. Every empire leaves a lesson in the wreckage. Subscribe for the next autopsy. Up next, how Blockbuster lost everything.